All right, and the final one we're going to work on are the two gentlemen in the dinghy, sort of on the lake. We have this sort of foggy mist behind us, and then this was just sort of also a limited palette. You've got some grays, and then all of this white area. It's got a little bit of pink in it, and I may do one little slight run of light red over it, but for the most part, all this part of the paper you're going to leave white. So you're going to focus on your grays and your green, a little bit of red in the boat, and then the blue in the water, and then the blue in the sky. So remember, the white of your paper is always, well, any type of white you have that you're trying to reproduce in watercolor is always going to be the paper. You shouldn't be mixing white in any of these combinations that I'm mixing. So here we have my sketch. And I think at this time I'm going to put, let's see if I can move it over a little bit. And put this right here. And I'll put my palette right here so you can see a little bit better this one on this one. All right, so I'm going to start off sort of mixing up kind of the gray tone, which is going to be a little bit, no, I take that back. Correction. I'm going to start putting this light red pinkish tone over the whole sort of sky, but it's going to be so light you cannot even, probably can't even see it on the paper. Very, very light. You can see when it goes down how dark it is, how the tone of it, and then I'm just spreading it out because I just want to tone the paper, sort of that light pink tone, and then I'll let that dry while I'm down here sort of putting some of it in the water, and of course a little more in the boat, moving it around like that. And so that's kind of my first layer. Now I'm going to dry it real quick to make sure that doesn't move on me. Okay, so now I've got that first layer down. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go immediately to I'm going to mix up kind of a gray with my blue and just a dot of the red. It's kind of a warm gray that may be all you need. I mean, maybe a dot of yellow, but I don't want it to turn green. Remember, if I put too much yellow with my blue, it's going to turn green. So just sort of a warm gray tone. And I'm just going to work this around in certain areas. I'm not going to go real crazy with this. It's going to be a little bit more controlled in terms of where I'm placing it and how I'm going about doing it, because I want it to sort of outline these clouds, but I don't want it to flood into the sort of the blue tone I put in the sky. So it's going to be right up here, kind of around the edge. And then I'll come over here, and there's a little swath of it kind of sitting right there. And I'll drop in a little bit there and sort of bring it down to here because it sort of makes up that tree form. And I'm going to just put it lightly on the tree form because I got to come back and I got to drop in some green up here at the top to indicate a tree. But the objective of this painting is to show you sort of what happens to foliage or trees or anything that's sort of dropped into the background with sort of a foggy haze over it. It just sort of becomes sort of monotone and just sort of a tonal value type painting and a type look. There's one right here that doesn't have a whole lot of green in it. It's just mainly just a gray tone kind of sitting right here. And then it just sort of bleeds down with a few other little grays kind of sort of into the mist, into the haze, and then sort of back into the water in certain areas here and here and kind of right in here. Also, the gentlemen, they have a lot of gray sort of in their jackets and their tone, and then sort of a lot of gray on the shadow side of this sort of this dinghy that they're in. Don't forget the paddles. And then that's all I'm going to do with the gray for right now. Now, I'm not going to have to go back to the hair dryer because I have controlled where I've put the gray, and so that means that I can come back in with my blue tone, sort of my sky blue, and sort of drop that in where I need to, sort of in this area. Let's see. This is just a blue. I put just a little dot of green in it, but you can also use just a little bit of the yellow to lighten it up. Like that. And it'll get a little bit lighter. I'm just going to not really fuss with it right now. I'm just going to leave it alone because right now it's the same value as the gray, but when I dab a little bit more in there, it's going to turn more of a blue tone. And then the blue, we got a lot of blue down here on the water, right in this area. To sort of indicate, you know, a little bit of the water mixed in with sort of the lake tone and that sort of haze and sort of that fog, but that's about all you have to do with that. Now the green and the trees, let's get into that. That's just going to be more of this, the blue, the sky blue, and I'm just going to drop a little yellow into it, like that. And that's all I'm going to do. Put a little yellow into the sky blue, and then sort of work out the shape of this tree. There's a little bit of foliage in here. Mine's a little bit bigger, but that's fine. I'll come back in and I'll sort of detail it out a little bit better. And that's all I'm going to do. Just drop a little green there, and then there's a little bit of green around the edges here on the tree as well. So I'll just kind of pop that in and let that just sort of diffuse sort of back into the clouds. So while that's all kind of drying in that area, I'm going to get into this boat that they're in, which is just some blue and this red. And it's fairly dark along the edge. So I can put in a line of sort of a dark red, which is the blue and the red, and I can drop in a little bit pure red, and then I can just sort of blend it. Put a little water into it and let it blend, and I can always come back and make it more intense. Make the darks a little bit more intense, the shadow areas. Let's get some of this blue right here, and then maybe some around the edge over in this area. And then it just kind of lightens up as it moves towards the back of the dinghy. And then you have this nice sort of dark kind of rippling shadow underneath it, which sort of falls in there, and then it bleeds right back into the boat. And then this blue bleeds into a much softer blue back here into the water, like that. So I'm going to take this sky blue and I'm going to drop it right back in where I had it to begin with up here in the sky. Maybe lighten it up just a little bit. But I want some separation between my sky color and my grays. Now the grays may not look quite dark enough, and so I can always go back in with this sort of reddish blue mixture that I had and just sort of shim them up a little bit and darken them in certain areas where they need to be darkened. And I'm going to do the same thing with the darker greens on the tree, because it's got some really darker flicks in here up top, but they're just kind of right on the edge like that. And then they just sort of fall away when they get down onto this other side. But the unique thing about this is that there's also a nice sort of a reddish running tone coming sort of out of the tree, but when it's mixed kind of with the green, then it takes on sort of a trunk brown or that type of a sort of a loose tone, and then it runs back into a much darker gray and red down here at the base. Like I said, this is the good thing about this project is, while I want you all to stick with the color combinations that I'm using, it's just a really, it's a good exercise just to kind of see how y'all sort of play with a brush and how you move it around and what you want to do with it and your tonal values and so forth. The figures are more the same. They're just the red and the brown, and they're sort of their little coats. A little bit darker blue in some areas. And actually this gentleman here has a, he's got kind of a yellow tonal hat, so I'll just put a little bit of yellow into that previous mixture. And just drop that into his hat right there. And like I said, the boat, once it starts to dry and set up, you can come back in with much darker tones, sort of line it up, sort of get it looking more like it's a little more detail work around the edges of how you want it to look. Of course, like I said, again, the paddles, one coming off there. This is sort of an anchor, a little dinghy, with a little red dot kind of in that area. And then you have a drop shadow, which comes off the paddle like that onto the water. So one thing I want you to notice about these exercises is that I'm using sort of like, you notice how I went in and I said, well, I gotta, I need to put a little more gray in there. Well, I'll just kind of take the blue I've got for the sky and I'll just put a little red in that to make a gray. Or if I've got a gray and I just kind of make a green tone that's has some blue in it, I'll just put a little yellow into that sky blue and I come up with a green. I darken my reds the same way with the shadow color that's back over here in the trees. And the point being to all this is that's what keeps a painting cohesive. I'm not going up and mixing like a separate puddle for each color I see. I'm just using what I have, and that creates sort of a familiar relationship between all the elements within the painting. So those are 3 tutorials on your in-class paintings. And I'm going to show you one. I'm going to go over the drawing exercise real quick next.